January 6th, 1944. The sky above the English countryside is a brittle gray, cold enough to bite through the thick wool of the Paratroopers' uniforms. In the dark hangars of Airborne Training Camp, England, the 101st and 82nd Airborne soldiers wait silently, faces pale under the harsh floodlights. The low hum of C-47 engines grows louder, a metallic roar that vibrates through the soles of boots and the wooden floors beneath them. Inside the planes, parachutes are strapped tight, weapons secured, maps clenched in nervous hands. A whispered prayer, a sigh. Somewhere in Normandy, unaware of the storm about to descend, German officers shuffle through reports and diaries, jotting schedules and assessing what they believe will be a routine night. They do not yet know the chaos about to be delivered from above. The ram drops. A soldier steps into the darkness. Wind grabs him, twisting, tossing, and then silence except for the rush of air and the distant murmur of confusion below. Somewhere, a German officer's pen falters midward. Fear has arrived, carried by American paratroopers. The night is no longer theirs. Early 1944. The war in Europe had reached a critical juncture. On the beaches of Normandy, thousands of soldiers would soon fight for every blade of grass, every ruined farm, every small rise in the hedgerow-laden countryside. But long before the first shells fell, the stage was being set far from France, in the planning rooms of London and the training fields of southern England. American airborne forces, still a relatively new concept in modern warfare, were preparing for a mission that would test the limits of both man and machine. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, elite units trained for parachute assault, had spent months in rigorous preparation. Every jump, every formation drill, every night march was designed to instill confidence and discipline under conditions of confusion and fear. Soldiers studied maps of Normandy in painstaking detail, memorizing fields, rivers, and towns that would soon become their battlefield. These men were not just trained to land, they were trained to disrupt. Small, lightly armed units were to strike behind enemy lines, capturing roads, bridges, and crossroads, throwing German defenses into disarray. Their mission was as much psychological as it was tactical. The Allies knew that the German military, despite its formidable reputation, was vulnerable to sudden, unpredictable assaults. German officers, meanwhile, relied heavily on intelligence reports that underestimated the reach and capability of airborne troops. In their command posts, they reviewed the Atlantic Wall's fortifications, inspecting bunkers, artillery placements, and minefields along the Normandy coast. They were confident that heavy fortifications and entrenched infantry would be enough to repel any attack. Yet, in private diaries, some officers admitted unease, a vague sense of dread that small, audacious units could slip through their lines and sow confusion. They would soon see this fear realized. Training for the Americans was exacting. Soldiers endured dozens of practice jumps, some from towers, others from aircraft over water or open fields. Injuries were common. Every broken bone, every twisted ankle was a reminder of the hazards that awaited. Yet, each man learned the same lesson: the chaos of a jump, the scattering of troops, the fog of war above enemy territory, was both danger and opportunity. Those who could survive the landing could turn the tide of a battle before the main forces even engaged. Meanwhile, In the months leading up to the invasion, Allied planners faced impossible calculations. The timing of the drop, the sequencing of gliders, the coordination with naval bombardments, all had to be precise. A single misstep could scatter units beyond recovery, leaving soldiers isolated and vulnerable. Yet, there was no room for hesitation. The goal was absolute. Establish footholds, seize strategic points, and paralyze German reaction before the beaches themselves were stormed. The men of the 101st and 82nd understood that their mission would not be glamorous. Few would see newspapers or headlines. Their triumphs would be measured in minutes and miles. A bridge captured, a road blocked, an artillery battery silenced. They were a weapon in human form, small, mobile, unpredictable. And this unpredictability was exactly what terrified German officers in ways that heavy fortifications never could. By January 1944, the tension in England was tangible. Even in the mess halls and barracks, there were whispers about the coming invasion. Some soldiers joked to mask fear. Others remained silent, lost in thought. Across the Channel, German officers were similarly preparing, though with far less awareness of the storm above them. Diaries from Wehrmacht's staff reveal a mixture of arrogance and routine confidence, punctuated by fleeting notes of apprehension. A line here mentions American paratroopers, improbable but unsettling. Another records restless nights, as if instinct already sensed the chaos that would arrive in the dark. The contrast could not have been sharper. One side, meticulously trained in small unit disruption, mentally rehearsing every possible contingency. The other, confident in numbers and fortifications, unaware of the psychological warfare that was about to hit them. In the skies above Normandy, the balance of fear was about to shift. Every map studied, every jump practiced, every diary penned on both sides converged toward one singular moment. A night of darkness, engines, and wind that would etch itself into the memory of both paratroopers and the German officers who feared them. And from this tension, the airborne assault of D-Day would emerge, not as a mere military maneuver, but as a study in courage, chaos, and the profound human impact of fear. The skies above Normandy were ready, and so were the men. But the enemy below, entrenched and confident, would soon discover that some threats cannot be measured by fortifications or numbers alone. Normandy was not an open field. It was a patchwork of farmland, hedgerows, sunken lanes, and small villages, each providing both cover and obstacles. For American paratroopers, the terrain presented a paradox, a landscape familiar from maps and rehearsals, yet unpredictable in the dark. Fields sloped unexpectedly. Trees and hedgerows became both shields and traps, and narrow roads funneled movement into choke points. Landing here was not merely a matter of precision. It was a gamble with life itself. German defenses exploited this landscape expertly. Infantry units manned the hedgerows, machine guns nestled in farmhouses, and artillery batteries overlooked key crossroads. Yet these fortifications were designed for conventional assaults. They assumed the enemy would arrive in mass formations, not in small, scattered units capable of striking unpredictably. Diaries from Wehrmacht officers reflect this mindset. Captain Heinrich Müller stationed near St. Miraglise, wrote in March 1944, "The Americans are bold, but their airborne tactics, this is only theory. We are prepared for an assault. Any other approach is unlikely." Such confidence, however, masked a simmering anxiety about forces striking from above. Command structures on the German side were rigid, centralized, and often slow to adapt. Orders had to pass through multiple levels, and communication lines could be disrupted with a single artillery strike or blown telephone wire. Field reports noted troop movements, but these were filtered through layers of bureaucracy, delaying critical decisions. In contrast, the American paratroopers trained to operate independently, with small units making instantaneous decisions. This asymmetry, flexibility versus rigidity, would prove decisive in the coming hours. Strategically, German officers faced a complicated calculus. Intelligence reports had warned of Allied buildup in southern England, but few predicted the scale or audacity of the airborne drops. The Allies had perfected deception campaigns, dummy paratroopers, fake radio traffic, and phantom army movements. Many German officers later wrote in diaries about nights spent staring at maps, uncertain where the real threat would emerge. General Wilhelm Richter, commanding a local regiment, noted, "Something stirs in the west. The details are unclear, but instinct tells me our line may fracture from within, rather than at the beaches." Meanwhile, American planners studied every nuance of the Normandy terrain. Each village, each river crossing, and each small bridge was cataloged for its tactical value. Paratroopers were assigned zones, objectives, and rally points. Yet even the best-laid plans acknowledged the reality of scattering. Pilots, weather, and anti-aircraft fire could, and would, throw soldiers off course. Commanders briefed their men not on precise execution, but on adaptability. Improvise, regroup, and strike wherever opportunity arose. The psychological dimension was equally important. German officers had long underestimated the morale and ingenuity of airborne troops. In their diaries, references to American tenacity appear repeatedly, often tinged with disbelief. These small, mobile units carried more than rifles. They carried the power to unnerve, to disrupt, to force decisions under pressure. The very concept of soldiers arriving from above, in darkness, and striking deep behind defensive lines, challenged conventional doctrine and shook confidence at every level. By May 1944, the pieces were in place. On the night of the invasion, American paratroopers would descend into chaos, scattered by wind, targeted by flak, forced to fight isolated battles in farm fields and villages. German officers would scramble, issuing orders that could not reach their units, confronting an enemy that appeared everywhere at once and nowhere at all. The stage was set for fear to become as potent a weapon as bullets or bombs. The geography, the fortifications, and the command hierarchies all converged to create a single, inevitable outcome. The German perception of control would shatter. And it would be in those fractured moments, when soldiers acted independently when chaos ruled the battlefield, that the true power of American paratroopers would be revealed. Every map studied, every defensive line drawn, and every diary penned led to one moment in the night sky. The airborne assault over Normandy, where men and fear would collide, and German officers would tremble before a force they could neither fully anticipate nor contain. The first angle is human. War, at its core, is lived experience, the pounding of a heart, the weight of a pack, the sweat of fear mixing with determination. For the paratroopers of the 101st and 82nd Airborne, each jump into Normandy was a baptism of chaos. Soldiers remembered the night sky lit only by stars and distant flares, engines droning overhead, a cold wind clawing at exposed skin. Their landing zones were scattered. Hedgerows swallowed men whole. An electricity of fear ran through every nerve. Private John Jack, Hagen of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, later recalled in his memoir, "I landed in a ditch, alone. My unit was gone. The night was silent, and every shadow could be the last thing I saw." Moments like this were repeated across hundreds of fields, each soldier confronting isolation, uncertainty, and the terrifying realization that their survival depended on initiative, courage, and the few allies they could gather in the darkness. The human story of these paratroopers is one of vulnerability transformed into audacity, fear molded into decisive action. The second angle is tactical. The genius of airborne operations lies in unpredictability. Unlike conventional assaults, these drops scattered forces across enemy lines, creating confusion and forcing adversaries to react rather than act on their own terms. German units expected methodical attacks, infantry advancing, artillery firing in measured support. Instead, small groups of Americans appeared behind defensive lines, cutting roads, seizing bridges, and neutralizing artillery observers. The impact of this chaos cannot be overstated. A single platoon capturing a crossroads could isolate entire German regiments. Diaries of German officers reveal frantic attempts to understand the scale and location of the attack. Lieutenant Karl Weber wrote, "They strike from everywhere at once, yet nowhere clearly. Orders are useless. Our formations are fragments." Tactical disruption became a psychological weapon, amplifying the effectiveness of small, lightly armed units far beyond their numbers. The third angle is technological. Paratroopers were not merely soldiers. They were instruments of innovation in airborne warfare. Their equipment was designed for mobility and surprise. Parachutes, adapted for stability under load, allowed men to descend from hundreds of feet with minimal control. M1 carbines and Thompson submachine guns provided firepower that could dominate confined spaces and hedgerows. Radios, though primitive, enabled coordination and the rapid dissemination of intelligence between scattered units. Gliders delivered heavy equipment, jeeps, light artillery, and mortars into the same chaotic zones, bridging the gap between infantry and mechanized support. Even the smallest technological edge mattered. A functioning radio could transform scattered men into a cohesive force. A machine gun captured from the enemy could hold a key position until reinforcements arrived. German officers, watching these sudden, unexpected assaults, repeatedly noted their bewilderment at the coordination achieved under such chaotic circumstances. Technology, when wielded by skilled and adaptable troops, magnified both disruption and fear. These first three angles converge on a central truth. The paratroopers were not just soldiers. They were a living, breathing instrument of unpredictability. Human courage, tactical innovation, and technological support combined to produce a force that German officers could neither fully anticipate nor easily counter. Their diaries, often meticulous and calm in routine days, now contain the language of anxiety and incredulity. Every notation of scattered men, every mention of captured bridges or blocked roads, reflects a creeping realization that control was slipping, that doctrine could not account for courage and ingenuity in the air. And yet, while these three angles capture the essence of airborne operations from the American side, they also illuminate the emotional and operational pressure on the enemy. Human experience, tactical disruption, and technological application were inseparable. Fear, confusion, and delay were the inevitable outcomes when these factors intersected. German officers trained for conventional warfare found themselves reacting in real time to a fluid threat, a small, dispersed, yet extraordinarily effective force that challenged assumptions at every level. The airborne assault, therefore, is best understood as a multi-layered phenomenon. On the ground, men fought for survival. From the air, small units struck at strategic points. Through equipment and innovation, these forces multiplied their impact. And for the German officers observing it all, the cumulative effect was not simply the loss of territory. It was the erosion of certainty, the shattering of confidence that comes with being attacked in ways for which no manual or plan could fully prepare them. From these perspectives, the story of American paratroopers becomes both human and operational. It is about fear and courage, improvisation and planning, chaos and control. And it is precisely this combination that would leave German officers trembling, their diaries filled with evidence of an enemy that seemed everywhere at once, and yet remained impossible to pin down. Leadership in the airborne units was tested like never before. Unlike conventional infantry, where orders could be relayed along rigid chains of command, paratroopers often found themselves isolated, sometimes dozens of miles from their intended drop zones. Decisions had to be immediate, improvisation mandatory. Officers like Lieutenant Colonel Robert Sink of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment were tasked with holding objectives despite scattered forces. Diaries from commanders reveal a constant internal dialogue. We are fragments, yet must act as one. Every man must understand the mission. Every man must decide in the moment. This decentralized command created a new type of battlefield authority, one in which initiative and judgment outweighed rank. In those tense hours, leadership became a force multiplier, enabling disorganized drops to coalesce into effective action, and forcing German officers to confront a system of warfare that was foreign, unpredictable, and profoundly unsettling. The enemy angle exposes the other side of that disruption. German officers, accustomed to rigid hierarchy and predictability, faced a phenomenon that textbooks had never described. Diaries from field officers reveal panic creeping through even seasoned veterans. Major Fritz Lang of the 91st Infantry Division wrote, "We cannot locate the Americans. Reports are contradictory. They appear in villages, on roads, behind our lines. It is as if they materialize from the air itself. Signals were delayed, units misaligned, and orders contradicted by events unfolding faster than any staff officer could process. The German perception of control evaporated as small, agile American units bypassed fortified positions, seizing roads and bridges with audacious efficiency. This confusion amplified fear, and fear itself became a weapon in the hands of the paratroopers. Beyond the tangible battlefield effects, there is a moral and psychological angle that cannot be ignored. Paratroopers carried with them the invisible weight of expectation, both their own and that of the Allied command. Each soldier knew that failure could result in isolation or death, yet the discipline instilled during training transformed fear into courage. Meanwhile, German officers experienced the inverse. The more they tried to assert control, the more the situation slipped from their grasp. In Diaries, phrases like helpless, confounded, and impossible to anticipate appear repeatedly. The psychological strain of facing an enemy that defied normal rules of engagement left an indelible mark on German command. They had fortifications, superior numbers in many sectors, and decades of traditional military doctrine, but none of it accounted for airborne units operating like shadows, unseen, elusive, and deadly. This moral and psychological dimension also extends to the paratroopers themselves. Fear was constant, but it became a crucible in which courage and resilience were forged. In one account, a paratrooper named Private Thomas Kelly recounted landing under fire, separated from his platoon, yet rallying a handful of scattered soldiers to secure a bridge over the Murderette River. His diary entry reads, "We were alone, outnumbered, and exposed, but action was the only choice. The men followed because someone had to lead. Fear became a tool, sharpened into purpose. In these moments, morality, duty, and survival fused, creating a psychological edge that German officers could neither understand nor counter. Leadership, enemy reaction, and moral force all intersected in the Normandy skies and fields. American officers leveraged initiative to transform chaos into coordinated strikes. German officers struggled to maintain control, their perceptions of strength undermined by unpredictability. Paratroopers, tiny units in a vast operation, created disproportionate psychological impact, sowing fear and confusion far beyond their physical numbers. Diaries, reports, and personal accounts consistently highlight this duality. Men were fighting for survival, and in doing so, reshaped the battlefield in real time. By combining tactical ingenuity, human resolve, and psychological impact, airborne operations forced a re-evaluation of conventional warfare. German officers trembled not simply because they were losing ground, but because their assumptions about combat, predictable enemy movements, enforceable control, and hierarchical decision-making were rendered obsolete. The small, scattered units of paratroopers challenged the very foundations of military logic, leaving in their wake a mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief. These angles together, human, tactical, technological, leadership, enemy, and psychological, set the stage for the climactic moments of the airborne assault. They explain why German officers' diaries are filled with anxiety, why small groups of Americans could shape entire sectors, and why the night of D-Day would become a turning point not just in the battle for Normandy, but in the art of modern warfare. Just past midnight on June 6, 1944, the First CE 47 Skitrans lifted into the great English sky, carrying the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions toward Normandy. Darkness cloaked their flight, but flak batteries below awaited, flashing sudden bursts of light that shredded the black horizon. Inside the planes, soldiers clutched rifles, maps, and the last scraps of courage. Their ears rang from engine noise. Their stomachs clenched with anticipation. A single misstep meant death. Yet every man knew the mission: land, disrupt, survive, and hold until reinforcements arrived. The drops began in chaos. Winds over the Normandy coast scattered paratroopers across a wide swath of terrain, landing zones twisted by weather and navigation errors. Some soldiers plummeted into trees, hedgerows, or the frozen Murderette River. Others touched down near enemy positions. Initial communications faltered. Units were separated, sometimes by miles. Yet in this disorder, leadership emerged. Small groups coalesced, soldiers improvising on the spot. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Sink recalled rallying men who had landed far from their designated zones. We had to act as one, even though we were many, scattered across fields no larger than a single company could hold. German forces were immediately thrown off balance. Officers, relying on predetermined defensive plans, found themselves reacting to sudden, isolated strikes. A platoon capturing a key crossroads disrupted the flow of supplies and reinforcements. A handful of paratroopers taking control of a bridge forced entire battalions to redirect movements. In private diaries, German officers wrote of disbelief and anxiety. Captain Heinrich Müller noted, "They appear everywhere and nowhere. Roads are blocked. Bridges are held by forces too small to account for. Our defenses crumble before they are tested." Key objectives were seized with remarkable efficiency. St. Mir-Eglise, a strategic town, fell to American paratroopers after hours of disjointed but determined action. The chaos of scattered drops became an advantage. German units misidentified the number of attackers, often overestimating strength. Small units held crossroads, secured artillery observers, and delayed counterattacks. Each success compounded the confusion at higher command levels as officers struggled to assess the battlefield. The paratroopers' ability to operate autonomously under fire magnified their effectiveness far beyond their numbers. Technological and tactical elements amplified the impact. Radios, though primitive, allowed scattered units to report positions and coordinate attacks. Captured enemy weapons were immediately pressed into service. Soldiers used hedgerows and ditches as improvised cover, advancing through a terrain that seemed to belong simultaneously to both sides. German soldiers, trained for conventional assaults, could not anticipate an enemy operating in fragments, striking unpredictably and vanishing before a countermeasure could be organized. Amid the confusion, leadership decisions were decisive. Officers on both sides faced life-and-death choices within moments. For American commanders, rapid assessment and initiative turned disorganization into coordinated resistance against superior forces. For German officers, delayed orders, and fragmented communication deepened panic. In Diaries, one German lieutenant wrote, "Reports arrive too late. Units act without instruction. It is as though the enemy dictates the tempo of our own defense." This inversion of control, the attackers shaping decisions from a distance, from scattered positions, and from the air, was unprecedented. By dawn, the initial drop had achieved what planners had hoped but never fully guaranteed. Bridges were held, roads blocked, artillery disrupted. German forces, though numerically superior, were immobilized, forced into reactive stances. The psychological toll was immense. Officers wrote of sleepless nights, of frantically redrawing maps, of trying to anticipate attacks that seemed to appear at will. American paratroopers, scattered yet cohesive, had transformed a chaotic drop into strategic advantage. The first hours of D-Day airborne operations were decisive not in sheer numbers, but in the intangible power of initiative, unpredictability, and fear. Each landing, each skirmish, each bridge captured added to the cumulative effect. German command was disoriented, defensive lines fragmented, and the idea of control shattered. By the time the main Allied forces landed on the beaches, the groundwork had been laid, not only by physical occupation, but by the profound psychological disruption inflicted on the enemy. In those fractured fields, under the shroud of night and mist, American paratroopers demonstrated the full measure of their training, courage, and audacity. The German diaries from this period reflect not merely defeat, but astonishment. Officers witnessing tactics they had neither prepared for nor imagined. This was the turning point when fear became as potent a weapon as any rifle or artillery shell, and the airborne units proved that even small forces, acting decisively and unpredictably, could dictate the course of a larger battle. The success of these initial hours set the stage for the consolidation of objectives, the further unraveling of German defenses, and the extraordinary human stories of bravery and improvisation that would define the remainder of the operation. As dawn broke over Normandy, the scattered paratroopers began to consolidate their positions. Isolated landings that once seemed chaotic were now coalescing into coordinated points of resistance. Soldiers who had fallen into hedgerows, streams, or behind enemy lines were linking up with others, forming ad hoc squads that operated with remarkable initiative. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Sink described the scene later. Men emerged from the darkness, joining forces with strangers, yet acting as if we had trained together for years. Each bridge secured, each crossroads controlled, expanded the ripple of confusion among German forces. Small unit actions became decisive. A single platoon from the 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment seized La Fere Bridge, a strategic crossing over the Murderette River. German troops, expecting to hold this point, found themselves under fire from unexpected directions. Attempts to dislodge the paratroopers were met with fierce resistance, improvisation, and sheer audacity. Private Thomas Kelly, recalling the engagement, wrote, "We had no reinforcements, no cover, but we had the initiative. Every second counted, every shot mattered." Across Normandy, similar scenes played out, paratroopers exploiting terrain, mobility, and enemy hesitation to turn small numbers into overwhelming tactical advantage. The German command, meanwhile, struggled to react. Reports from units arrived piecemeal, often contradictory, and officers found themselves issuing orders that could not reach frontline soldiers in time. Captain Heinrich Muller's diary entry from early morning captures the mounting tension. Our units are disoriented. Roads we must defend are held by tiny forces we cannot locate. Command seems meaningless in the face of this unpredictability. The psychological impact of these dispersed, aggressive attacks was profound. German officers were forced into a constant state of reaction, their traditional doctrine rendered obsolete by the agility and audacity of airborne forces. Technological improvisation played a pivotal role. Paratroopers used captured enemy weapons, coordinated movements via portable radios, and leveraged the terrain for cover and advantage. Gliders brought in jeeps, light artillery, and mortars, further enhancing the effectiveness of these scattered units. Soldiers who landed far from their objectives adapted quickly, turning hedgerows, orchards, and narrow lanes into makeshift defensive positions. In many instances, German soldiers, unfamiliar with such fluid tactics, misjudged the strength and disposition of these units, overestimating the threat and diverting forces away from critical points. Leadership under fire was a constant theme. American officers empowered their men to make immediate tactical decisions. Junior leaders, non-commissioned officers, and even privates demonstrated initiative, seizing objectives, organizing ambushes, and rallying scattered soldiers. In one account, a sergeant who landed 2 miles from his unit assembled a team from 3 different companies, holding a key road junction until reinforcements arrived. Such actions, repeated across Normandy, multiplied the effect of the initial drops and created the impression of a larger, more coordinated force. The cumulative effect on German forces was catastrophic. Units intended to defend the invasion's flanks were immobilized, bridges were held by a handful of Americans, and critical artillery observers were neutralized. Commanders reported exhaustion, confusion, and frustration. Diaries reveal the profound sense of helplessness. Officers writing at dawn about roads they could not clear, positions lost without decisive engagement, and the inability to predict where attacks would emerge next. Major Fritz Lang noted, "They move as shadows. We respond, but our responses are always one step behind. Our defenses are crumbling under the weight of their unpredictability." By mid-morning, the airborne objectives were largely secured. Despite scattered landings, casualties, and confusion, the paratroopers had not only survived, but had established control over strategic points that would facilitate the main Allied landings on Utah and Omaha beaches. Their actions immobilized German reinforcements and created a psychological edge that would influence German decision-making for days to come. Fear, confusion, and uncertainty now ruled the battlefield, and German officers' diaries from this period reflect a mixture of awe and anxiety at the ingenuity and audacity of these small, dispersed units. The night's chaos had transformed into a day of achievement. Paratroopers had demonstrated that initiative, courage, and adaptability could overcome numerical superiority and fortified positions. The disruption of German command, combined with the effective seizure of critical objectives, ensured that the Normandy landings would occur with significantly reduced opposition in key sectors. Every bridge held, every road blocked, and every hedgerow defended was a testament to the extraordinary effectiveness of airborne operations. The consolidation of these objectives not only determined the immediate tactical outcome, but also set a precedent for modern warfare. Small, agile forces operating with decentralized leadership and exploiting surprise could achieve results disproportionate to their size. German officers, reading the aftermath in diaries and reports, would later admit that these paratroopers had redefined their understanding of battlefield effectiveness. The stage was now set for the aftermath, the reckoning of casualties, territorial gains, and the enduring psychological impact on German forces. What had begun as scattered chaos above Normandy had matured into decisive disruption, leaving both sides to measure the cost, the courage, and the extraordinary human consequences of airborne operations. By the morning of June 6, 1944, the first shock waves of the airborne assault were fully evident. The scattered paratroopers, despite heavy losses during the drop, had achieved remarkable tactical results. Bridges were held, crossroads controlled, and artillery observers neutralized. In many cases, a handful of men had immobilized entire German units, forcing commanders to commit reserves to areas they otherwise might have ignored. The sheer audacity and effectiveness of these small, fragmented groups had a profound ripple effect across the battlefield. Casualties were significant, but did not undermine the operation's success. Among the 13,000 paratroopers deployed, roughly 1,200 were killed, wounded, or missing during the initial drop, with countless others scattered across the Normandy countryside. Private accounts reveal soldiers wounded in hedgerows, carried by comrades, and continuing to fight despite exhaustion and injury. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Sink later described the scene. Every man who could stand became a force multiplier. Survival demanded action. Hesitation meant death. Yet even in fragments, we held our objectives. German forces, though numerically superior in most sectors, were paralyzed by uncertainty. Units trained to engage frontal assault struggled to react to airborne threats that seemed to appear from every direction simultaneously. German diaries, recovered after the war, reveal officers grappling with impossible decisions. Captain Heinrich Müller wrote, "Reinforcements are delayed. Roads we must hold are occupied. The Americans act with a boldness that is difficult to counter. The chaos of the scattered drops magnified fear, eroding confidence in traditional command structures. Strategically, the paratroopers' success ensured that the main Allied landings faced less concentrated resistance in critical areas. Bridges and roads that had been captured or defended by small groups allowed infantry, armor, and supplies to move inland with reduced delay. For the Allies, this was not merely a tactical advantage, it was a psychological one. German commanders would later describe being stunned by the audacity of American troops who had struck deep behind their lines, leaving them reacting to events rather than directing them. The human cost, however, was palpable. Paratroopers were isolated, cold, and often short on ammunition or medical support. Many fought for hours, even days, before regrouping with their units. Yet these extreme conditions forged extraordinary acts of courage. Private Thomas Kelly recounted holding a road junction with only a handful of men, improvising defenses with hedgerows, farm fences, and captured German weapons. Diaries emphasize the resilience of men who, despite injury or exhaustion, refused to yield their objectives. These individual stories illustrate the combination of training, adaptability, and sheer human determination that made the airborne assault more than just a military maneuver. It became a human triumph under fire. German forces, in turn, were forced to reevaluate their assumptions. Defensive positions that were designed to repel massed infantry or armored assaults proved insufficient against small, highly mobile units operating independently. Officers reported confusion, delays, and misallocated troops. The psychological impact on commanders, frustration, anxiety, and fear was as significant as the physical losses on the battlefield. A recurring theme in Diaries is the recognition that paratroopers could strike anywhere, at any time, with an intensity and unpredictability that conventional defenses could not contain. The immediate tactical shift was clear. German units abandoned rigid plans and attempted to consolidate fragmented lines, often moving too slowly or in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, paratroopers continued to hold critical points, enabling armored and infantry units landing on Utah and Omaha beaches to advance inland with fewer obstacles than had been anticipated. The initial confusion caused by airborne operations created a window of opportunity that shaped the course of the entire Normandy campaign. The combination of casualties inflicted on German forces, disruption of command structures, and seizure of key objectives demonstrated the enormous effectiveness of airborne tactics. Small, isolated units had, in essence, dictated the tempo of the battle. German officers' diaries repeatedly underlined this sense of surprise and frustration, highlighting a profound psychological effect that extended far beyond the immediate losses in men or territory. The initial hours and immediate aftermath of the airborne operation set the stage for the full strategic impact. Bridges held, roads blocked, and German defenses disrupted. The battlefield had been irrevocably altered. But the story was far from over. The psychological toll, further casualties, and long-term consequences of these daring operations would unfold in the days that followed. In the days following the airborne assault, the full impact of the American paratroopers became clear. German forces struggled to re-establish cohesion, their command structure fractured by the unpredictability and audacity of scattered units operating deep behind the lines. Reports arrived too late, often conflicting, leaving officers frustrated and indecisive. Where reinforcements were dispatched, they frequently encountered empty fields, hedgerows abandoned by Americans who had moved swiftly to new objectives. The paralysis of German command in these critical hours highlights a profound lesson. Control in war is as much psychological as it is tactical. Bridges and key crossroads, held by a few dozen men in some cases, enabled Allied armor, infantry, and supplies to flow inland with greater speed and safety. The Normandy beachheads, previously anticipated as heavily contested, faced reduced opposition in certain sectors thanks to these airborne actions. Strategic calculations changed rapidly. German commanders realized that rigid defensive doctrines, relying on predictable responses, were inadequate against an enemy capable of appearing unpredictably across multiple axes. Diaries reflect this shift. Major Fritz Lang wrote, "The Americans move like shadows. Our plans, our numbers, our defenses All are irrelevant when they strike where we do not expect. The psychological toll on German officers endured well beyond the battlefield. Anxiety over airborne assaults became a recurring theme in diaries, with many acknowledging a new fear of small, mobile units capable of striking unpredictably. Captain Heinrich Muller reflected, "I had underestimated them. Their audacity is unnerving. One man or 10 can cause confusion that entire regiments cannot undo." This fear was not merely of physical loss. It was the realization that traditional command and control, the backbone of German doctrine, was vulnerable to disruption by initiative and ingenuity. For the American side, the aftermath was both triumph and tragedy. Casualties had been heavy, and many men remained scattered for hours or even days, enduring exposure, hunger, and isolation. Yet their perseverance secured key objectives, disrupted enemy defenses, and provided a crucial advantage to the Allied advance. Stories of bravery and improvisation became legend. Soldiers who held bridges against overwhelming odds or rallied disparate groups of men exemplified the combination of training, courage, and situational adaptability that defined airborne warfare. These acts were noted not only in American records, but also in the journals of German officers, who reluctantly acknowledged the skill and determination of their adversaries. The long-term strategic consequences were equally significant. German planners now faced a constant threat from airborne operations, forcing them to redistribute forces to defend rear areas, bridges, and key roads. Resources that could have reinforced the front lines were diverted to counter a threat that had been underestimated. The perception of vulnerability altered German strategy, creating openings that Allied planners could exploit in subsequent operations. Airborne warfare had proven that mobility, surprise, and psychological impact could achieve results disproportionate to numerical strength. German diaries, once filled with routine assessments, now contain passages of dismay and reflection. Lieutenant Carl Weber noted, "We train for every scenario, yet they always appear where we are weakest. Their courage unnerves even the most experienced among us. Control has become a fleeting concept. The fear instilled by small, highly capable forces persisted beyond Normandy, shaping German attitudes toward airborne operations for the remainder of the war." In the end, the aftermath of the American paratrooper assault was a dual victory. Tangibly, key objectives were held, enemy movements disrupted, and the way cleared for beach landings and further Allied advances. Intangibly, German officers were forced to confront a new reality: the unpredictable, autonomous actions of small, determined units could impose fear and chaos on even the most disciplined army. Diaries, reports, and post-battle assessments all underscore the same truth. American paratroopers redefined the psychological and operational landscape of modern warfare, leaving a legacy that would echo across campaigns and military doctrines for decades. The airborne assault's immediate and long-term consequences set the stage for reflection, not only on strategy and tactics, but on courage, improvisation, and the human dimension of war. From this realization, we move toward the final closure, a calm, philosophical examination of what these operations meant for history, humanity, and the art of warfare itself. The airborne assault over Normandy was more than a tactical maneuver. It was a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and adaptability. In the dark hours before dawn, small groups of men, scattered, isolated, and facing overwhelming odds, shaped the course of a massive operation. They transformed chaos into opportunity, confusion into control, and fear into a force multiplier. Their actions demonstrated that warfare is not merely the application of numbers or firepower, but the ability to act decisively in the midst of uncertainty. For German officers, the assault shattered assumptions. Fortifications, doctrine, and numerical superiority offered little comfort against an enemy who moved unpredictably, struck audaciously, and forced decisions under pressure. Diaries reveal a rare glimpse into the psychology of fear in leadership. The realization that even the most disciplined army can be disrupted by initiative and courage. In this sense, the paratroopers' greatest weapon was not their rifles or gliders, but the uncertainty they imposed on their adversaries. The Normandy airborne operations also redefined modern warfare. Small, agile units operating with decentralized leadership and leveraging surprise became capable of influencing entire campaigns. Lessons learned in hedgerows and villages extended far beyond June 1944, shaping doctrines, training, and military thinking for decades. The combination of human resilience, tactical innovation, and psychological impact became a model for understanding how limited forces can achieve disproportionate effects. Yet, beyond strategy and doctrine, there is the human story. Soldiers confronting fear, improvising under fire, and holding objectives against the odds remind us of the enduring qualities of courage, determination, and unity. Diaries, letters, and first-hand accounts capture moments of tension, exhaustion, and triumph. Moments that connect us to the individuals who lived, fought, and survived. In the end, the Normandy airborne assault stands as a singular example of how bravery and ingenuity can reshape the battlefield and the mind. It reminds us that in war, as in life, control is fleeting, fear is real, and courage emerges in the spaces between uncertainty and action. The men who jumped into the night of Normandy left more than strategic gains. They left a lesson in human resolve, a story of audacity, and a legacy that would forever echo in military history.